You know that goal you set at the start of the year? You can still do it, whether you're committed to a thru hike with friends, lifting heavier, or simply walking more. It's not too late to stick with it and make your future self proud, especially with the all-in-one nutrition shake from Kachava. Because quality nutrition shouldn't be complicated. Just 2 scoops of Kachava's all-in-one nutrition shake, and you've got 25 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, greens, adaptogens, and so much more. Plus, it actually tastes delicious. No fillers, no nonsense. Just the good stuff your body craves. So instead of adding to your backstock of supplements that overpromise and underdeliver, simplify your progress with just 2 scoops of the highest quality ingredients. Stick with your wellness goals. Go to kachava.com and use code FITNESS for 15% off. That's kachava.com and use code FITNESS. KACHAVA.com, code FITNESS.
Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
Which side of the time change debate do you fall on? Are you a fan of the semi-annual clock switching as it marks the end of another Canadian winter, finally ready to welcome spring, more sunlight, and just better times? Or are you on the side of, if I have to go through the motions of changing all my clocks and routines one more time, there's going to be an issue? Both sides, they're valid, although most Canadians fall on the latter, citing, yes, convenience and routine, but also health and safety concerns. But the same goes for the former. People who are pro-clock change, who worry about what longer, dark mornings in the winter could signal for Canadians heading to work or kids going to school in pitch black. And as British Columbia sets the stage for a permanent switch to daylight saving time, the rest of the country now has to grapple with what the best choice may be, bearing in mind safety and economic concerns. I'm Maria Kestane, and today on The Big Story, I'm talking to David Prerau, an expert in daylight saving time and author of Seize the Daylight, the curious and contentious story of daylight saving time. Today, we're getting into the more unpopular argument around daylight saving time, which is why the switching back and forth is actually not the worst idea. David, I just want to say thank you so much for joining me. This is such an interesting conversation, and it's one that's been going on for quite some time. I mean, the debate between keeping the semi-annual time change and getting rid of it is as old as time, and that's exactly where I want to start, back in time, to set the scene as to how we got here in the first place. I mean, how did the inception of daylight saving time start?
Well, it goes back a long way to more than one person, so I'll just give you a little summary of that. The actual concept, we think, we sort of say, goes back to Benjamin Franklin, the American statesman, 1784. He was, after the Revolutionary War, he was ambassador to France, and he was living in Paris. And he used to go to diplomatic events. He was that kind of guy, and stay up all night. And partying, and then he'd sleep till noon every day. Well, one day he woke up early. Something woke him up at like 8 in the morning, and he saw the light shining in his window. And he said, well, if I had this light shining in my window in the evening, I wouldn't have to use these expensive candles that I have to buy. Instead, I'd have light for free. So wouldn't it be smarter to try to get up a little earlier, closer to sunrise, and make use of that light that I'm sleeping through? And that's basically the concept of daylight saving time, to try to move your hours of human activity to make the best use of daylight, whatever one decides the best use of daylight is. However, Franklin didn't have any good idea of how to accomplish that. And he only had some humorous ideas, being the sharp guy he was. And he suggested things like having a tax on shutters. But my favorite was, he suggested having a cannon go off every day in the morning at sunrise in every square in Paris to wake everyone up in the city and get them up and to appreciate the early sun in the morning. However, that never happened, of course. So nothing ever happened from that. But that's the general concept way back in 1784. Anyway, next step that happened was a guy named George Vernon Hudson, who lived in New Zealand. He came up, the first one that we know of, that came up with the idea of moving the clocks forward an hour. However, most of the people in New Zealand thought it was a crazy idea and didn't listen to him, and it never happened in New Zealand. And in fact, New Zealand wound up being one of the last countries to adopt daylight saving time, even though this guy had been there and had suggested it first. So the person who really led to the idea that we have today is a guy named William Willett. He lived in England, outside of London, and he was a builder of stately homes. But what he would do is he'd wake up at sunrise, go on a horseback ride around his neighborhood in the suburbs of London, and then come back and then take the train into London and commute and do his work every day. Well, he would do this every day, and one day while he was riding around 6 in the morning, whenever it was, early morning when the sun has already risen, and he said, nobody's up but him. And everyone's missing this beautiful sunrise. So the sunlight. Wouldn't it be great if we could get people to get up earlier and utilize the sun? So he had the idea again of moving the clocks forward an hour. And he eventually spent some time coming up with all sorts of options of how it would work. And he spent 2 or 3 years of really investigating it. And he published a pamphlet called The Waste of Daylight. That's what he thought. The day was being wasted by people that are sleeping through it. Anyway, he proposed it as a bill in Parliament in 1908. Parliament had a big commission that looked into it, but they rejected it. But William Willett wasn't the kind of guy that gave up easily, so he had it proposed again in Parliament in 1909, rejected 1910, 1911, rejected every year. In 1911, one cute note of interest, they had a pro-daylight saving time rally. You wouldn't think of such a thing. A pro-daylight saving time rally in London, and the principal speaker was Winston Churchill. Now, this was 1911, well before he became famous in World War II, but he was one of the leading people in Parliament even then. And he gave a wonderful speech, but didn't have, Parliament still rejected it. And they kept rejecting it. And then William Willett died in 1915. And everybody said, well, he's the main proponent of it, and he's dead. That's probably the end of the idea. But it was World War I. And countries were looking for ways to do things differently. And one of the countries that was looking was England's enemy, Germany. And they had heard of Willett's idea of daylight saving time, moving the clocks forward. And they realized if they did that, they could have more light to light their factories. So they wouldn't have to use expensive fuel to light up their factories. They could light it up for free with the light coming through the windows. So Germany, it wound up, the enemy of England, was the first country to put in daylight saving time in 1916. As soon as they did that, the British, their enemy, put it in a month later. And eventually, most of the countries on both sides of World War I put daylight saving time in. And that's really how it started. It got widespread throughout World War I. U.S. and Canada put it in at the end of World War I when they joined World War I. They eventually put in daylight saving time.
Quite the comprehensive history there. I could only imagine cannons going off in the square in the morning. David, tell me, what do you think is the most misunderstood aspect of daylight saving time that fuels this annual let's get rid of the switch debate?
I mean, one of there's things from the very beginning. I mean, daylight saving time people thought was for the farmers, and it turns out the farmers were always against it. They were the number one group against it. Somehow, people got the feeling it was for the farmers. So that's a long time misconception. But nowadays, people think that daylight saving time causes things. First of all, when they talk about what it causes, they're talking about the first day or two. Daylight saving time is on for 8 months. So even if the first day or two had some negatives, if the next 7 months and almost 8 months were positive, that outweighs it. So you can't just go by what happens the first few days of daylight saving time. But even then, like there was people thought it had to do with it caused heart attacks, and then they just did a Mayo Clinic just did a big study over 5 years and 35 million people and found that it didn't. And people think that it's a big burden on a lot of people, but I say not much different, not different at all, than going from one city to another city that's one time zone to the east. Like if you went from Chicago to New York, or you went from London to Paris, or you went from Beijing to Tokyo. All of those are one time zone difference. Millions of people do that all the time, and they don't complain. I mean, it's inconvenient a little having a slightly different time, but nobody says they're going to die from it or anything. They don't think of it as a major thing, and somehow people think of it as a major problem. But really, if you handled it the same way that travelers handle that kind of thing, which is preparing a little in advance, maybe getting a little extra sleep the day before, and don't make too many plans early in the morning the first day that it changes. That's basically what a traveler does when they go to a different time zone and they have business meetings and things. They try to get a little extra sleep and try not to schedule anything. So so a lot of these things can be handled relatively straightforwardly, like we handle. And you wouldn't tell people it's very dangerous for you to go from Chicago to New York. You better not do it, or London to Paris. So it's the same kind of thing. That's that. So I think that's a big misunderstanding.
So you think you'd consider it more of inconveniences instead of like the hardships of.
Yes, it's an inconvenience that you have to deal with the same way you deal, as I said, with changing a time zone. It's a little inconvenience. It's not like changing 5 time zones, which people do, right? So the same as 1 hour. Just go to sleep a little early, a day or two before, if you want to get extra sleep. Sleep a little later the next day. It's always on a Saturday night, so you could always sleep late, or most people could sleep late on Sunday morning.
There you go.
Make their plans on Saturday, and it's easily, if you want to. What happens is a lot of people don't know it's coming, so their plan to go out partying till 3 a.m. And then when you wake up the next morning, they say they lost an hour of sleep, so they're grumpy and not in a good mood, and maybe not as vital as they might be. But if they had known, maybe, and planned for it. So what I say is, what you could have is a public service announcements that would come on radio and TV and would say, next week, Saturday night, we're going to have daylight saving time change. We're going to lose an hour of sleep. So maybe a few days before, you might want to get a little extra sleep. Don't stay up till late Saturday night. Don't plan too much on Sunday morning, the same way you would do if you were traveling to a different time zone. And that's it. No big deal.
Another argument made for ditching the time shift is for energy saving, as you alluded to in the history of the time change. But we know from past trials of this isn't necessarily the case, or if it is, the amount of energy being saved isn't as significant. Is there a legitimate case for the energy saving argument?
Yes, well, it's been used in both world wars. For energy saving. It was in World War II. It was in the United States year round. They extended it in order to have daylight saving time all year round to save energy. In Britain, they actually went to double daylight saving time in part of the year during World War II to save even more energy. So it does save energy. Even the last big study. Now, there's some small studies of small areas, and maybe they have different results. But the last big study was done by the Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Energy, and they found that even on the edges of the daylight saving time period, it saves maybe 0.5% of energy. In the middle of the year, it'll be even more. But even 0.5% is a lot, considering it's free, basically, and it's worth a lot of money if you think of how much money energy costs on how much. So anyway. That's the thing. It does save energy, and it can be used for that. But there's a lot of other reasons too. Traffic accidents, crime, health. A lot of people it gets people out of the house an extra hour after they come home from work or they come home from school. And a lot of people may not do it if the sun is going to set right after they get home. But if there's an hour or two of daylight, they go outside, and so they get more exercise, and then that's good for public health.
What does the research say about the longer term health and safety advantages of adjusting the sunrise and sunset times seasonally?
Well, as I said, it seems to me it's a matter of planning and getting ready to take care of it. But now, if someone just does a quick loss of an hour and doesn't do any preparation, they're going to feel maybe a little groggy. Maybe they will have an extra, more traffic accidents the first day or two. But on the other hand, daylight saving time has been shown to reduce traffic accidents for it's 8 months. We have daylight saving time for 8 months now, from about March to beginning of November. In that 8 months, it saves a lot of traffic accidents and fatalities because there's more light in the evening when there's commuters are driving home or whatever, and you're not losing anything because when you have daylight saving time in the summer, you're taking an hour that used to if the sun used to rise at 5 a.m., you change it to 6 a.m., but nobody was up between 5 and 6 anyway, so you didn't lose anything. But then you add it at the evening, and maybe the sun used to rise, set at 7, and now it sets at 8. That's an extra hour of light that makes traffic accidents reduced. It definitely does that as well.
You know, this all comes on the backdrop of one of the Canadian provinces, British Columbia, making the decision to permanently switch to daylight saving time without any sort of trial period or experimentation with the switch. And, not to sound pessimistic, but this is certainly not our first rodeo. In the 70s, the U.S. tried to do it year round under Nixon. That was scrapped. In 2019, Brazil tried to do it, also scrapped. Can you tell us what happened in both those situations?
The thing that happened in the United States was 1973, 1974. There was an oil embargo from the Arab countries cutting back oil to the U.S. that led to an energy crisis, unexpected, peacetime. So they didn't know what to do, and they tried a lot of different things. And one thing was, well, we've used daylight saving time to save energy during the war. Why don't we extend it to year round? At that time, they had it for 6 months. Extend it to year round. And everybody said that's fine, which is probably the same attitude they're having in British Columbia today, right? They say, oh, that's going to be fine. That's coming in, months from now. But when it does, that'll be great. And that's what everybody thought until it actually happened. When it happened, it wasn't so good for most people. People didn't like the dark mornings. And of course, it depends where you live, how dark they are. But a lot of places, people are getting up in the dark, going to work in the dark, sending their kids to school in the dark, which they hated the most. And they didn't like their kids walking on dark city streets or waiting for the school bus on the side of dark country roads. It's dangerous. And so nobody liked it. So very quickly, it went from being very popular before it happened to being very unpopular once it did happen. And so that was in the winter in January 74. So it was passed as a 2-year temporary measure, but it was so unpopular that the Congress got rid of the second year of it. They only let it go for the first year, and then they got rid of it. So that's what happened there, and that might be what happens in British Columbia. I did look it up, and I saw that in Vancouver, they would have sunrises after 9 a.m. in the darkest parts of the year in January. Well, 9 a.m. means most people who are going to work or school are up and out already. And not only that, of course, in a colder climate, like they'd have in BC, it's colder if you get up before sunrise. The coldest part of the day might be the hour before sunrise. So if you're up the hour before sunrise on your way to work or school, and it's not only dark, but it's cold, it's very depressing. A lot of people didn't like it at all. And that's why it got so unpopular in the U.S. so quickly. So, and the same thing might happen. We'll see. Maybe they'll say, "Oh, we enjoy it," but it seems to me, and if it's that case in Vancouver, of course, you go a little more north, and BC is going to even be worse. But there's going to be some point where you get to a place where it's dark already. I mean, when you get really far north, it's dark all morning already in the winter, no matter what, because the sun is already rising at 9:30. So then if you may go from 9:30, you move it to 10:30, that doesn't affect most people so much. So those places, like I understand the Yukon put in daylight saving time, but it's dark in the morning anyway. So the extra darkness in the morning doesn't affect them because it's already beyond where people are commuting or sending their kids to school. But in places that are closer to a little more south, they get to a place where the sun used to rise, or the sun used to set. What was it? Sun used to rise at 8 a.m. Now it's rising at 9 a.m. That's a big difference. Or 8:30 now it's 9:30. That's a big difference for a lot of people because that's when they're commuting or sending their kids to school.
Yeah, I mean, even in Florida, 8 kids died, I believe, as a result of car accidents just after the first few weeks of the permanent time change being implemented.
Yes, that's true. Those things will happen, and when people hear about them, then they get more worried. So the other thing is, of course, if you changed your system and no one else changes, like BC is doing,
Right.
very inconvenient as well, independent of the darkness and the lightness, because everybody else, or most everybody in the U.S. and Canada, are changing on the same days, and you're not. So now it's bad for transportation, all buses, planes, trains that used to leave one city at 8 o'clock and arrive at 9 o'clock. Now it arrives at 10 o'clock. Well, that may be that you miss a connection, for example, because a lot of the things are made, or the plane schedules are made for connections. It's bad for business. If you're if you're calling from out of BC into BC, and you call up and they say, "Oh, we're not open yet," because they we call up 8:30, but it's really only 7:30 here, so we didn't they could lose business. So that's another thing. Businessmen don't, and they don't like to have their company situated in a place like that, because then everybody they deal with is going to have that time change problem. So and communication as well. If there's national TV shows like sports events and stuff, they come an hour differently in your area than the whole rest of the country. So there's a lot of problems being unique, even if you didn't worry about the darkness in the morning.
Now that BC has announced the change, if more Canadian provinces, let's say, decide to reconsider a daylight saving time policy, what arguments, based on evidence, should they prioritize, you think?
Well, I think you have to look at the fact that if they wanted to go, it depends what they wanted to change it to. Assuming they want to change the year-round daylight saving time, which is what BC did, then the 3/4 of the year aren't changed. So you don't have to worry about those. You have to worry about what's going to happen in the dark 4 months of the year, like November through the beginning of March, let's say. And what happens then is you have an extra hour of darkness in the morning, which affects commuters and it affects children going to school. And also, from what I understand, circadian rhythms go by when you first, when it gets to be light. So if everything is pushed back an hour, then everybody's rhythm is pushed out. So that's not so good too. There's a lot of little subgroups. There's groups I've spoken to, religious groups that their religion says they have to say a prayer before work, but after sunrise. Well, that's okay when the sunrise is 7 in the morning. When the sunrise is 9 or 9:30, they have a problem. How do they handle that? That's just one typical kind of example of them. So there's a lot of things like that. So we'll see what happens, but there's a lot of problems. And as I said, the non-uniformity is a big problem as well.
All right, definitely an interesting conversation, and I'm sure the debate will continue for years to come. David, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate this.
Okay, very good. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
And that was The Big Story. Everyone has different thoughts on this conversation, and we'd love to hear yours. Find us on Blue Sky at The Big Story, on Instagram at Frequency Pods, or send us an email at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca. New episodes publish every morning, and don't miss our weekend listens. The Big Story is produced by me, Maria Kestane. Diana Kay is the head of strategy and content. Desi Nair is the manager of podcast operations. Dylan McGuire is our associate producer. Thanks for listening.